He'd be at Crypto.com Arena for his first shift. His first job. And not just any job. Working at the very stadium where the players he idolized came alive on the court. The sound of a chair scraping across the kitchen floor broke Ethan's reverie. He set the uniform down carefully, folding it neatly, then walked down the narrow hall. He paused when he saw his mom, Mrs. Carter, sitting at the small kitchen table. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and her fingers rubbed at the circles under her eyes. She'd just come off a long night shift at the hospital, still wearing her scrubs. A coffee mug steamed in front of her, but she hadn't taken a sip. "Hey, Mom," Ethan greeted. He tried to sound cheerful. "You're up early." She looked up and offered a tired smile. "Couldn't sleep. I wanted to see you off before your first day." Her voice was warm but laced with that same weary note that Ethan had grown used to over the years. "Thanks." He stepped closer, hesitating before asking, "How's Lily doing?" "She's still sleeping. Yesterday was a little rough with her breathing, but the inhaler helped." Mrs. Carter glanced at the fridge, where a handwritten note reminded them to pick up more medication. "She'll be okay." Ethan nodded, feeling the familiar knot of responsibility tighten in his chest. His little sister's asthma had always been a worry. And with money tight, every trip to the pharmacy felt like walking a financial tightrope. That's part of why he had taken this job. The extra income would help cover the rising costs of Lily's treatments. And maybe, just maybe, make things a little easier on their mom. At the uniform in his hands. Bright purple. The Lakers' iconic logo stitched across the chest. It looked as if it belonged to a superhero rather than a 16-year-old high schooler. The polyester fabric caught the dim light filtering into his room, giving it an almost magical glow. He ran his thumb over the patch, shaking his head in disbelief. In just a few hours, he'd be at Crypto.com Arena for his first shift. His first job. And not just any job. Working at the very stadium where the players he idolized came alive on the court. The sound of a chair scraping across the kitchen floor broke Ethan's reverie. He set the uniform down carefully, folding it neatly, then walked down the narrow hall. He paused when he saw his mom, Mrs. Carter, sitting at the small kitchen table. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and her fingers rubbed at the circles under her eyes. She'd just come off a long night shift at the hospital, still wearing her scrubs. A coffee mug steamed in front of her, but she hadn't taken a sip. "Hey, Mom," Ethan greeted. He tried to sound cheerful. "You're up early." She looked up and offered a tired smile. "Couldn't sleep. I wanted to see you off before your first day." Her voice was warm but laced with that same weary note that Ethan had grown used to over the years. "Thanks." He stepped closer, hesitating before asking, "How's Lily doing?" "She's still sleeping. Yesterday was a little rough with her breathing, but the inhaler helped." Mrs. Carter glanced at the fridge, where a handwritten note reminded them to pick up more medication. "She'll be okay." Ethan nodded, feeling the familiar knot of responsibility tighten in his chest. His little sister's asthma had always been a worry. And with money tight, every trip to the pharmacy felt like walking a financial tightrope. That's part of why he had taken this job. The extra income would help cover the rising costs of Lily's treatments. And maybe, just maybe, make things a little easier on their mom. "You're going to do great," Mrs. Carter said suddenly, reaching out to squeeze his arm. Her smile brightened, and for a moment, the dark circles under her eyes seemed less noticeable. "Just remember, be polite, work hard, and always show up 15 minutes early. You're a Carter. You know how to give it your best." Ethan grinned. "I'll make you proud." "You already do," she replied. The bus ride to the arena felt surreal. Ethan sat by the window, watching the city come alive as the sun rose higher. Cars honked in the distance, and pedestrians moved with purpose along the streets. He pulled out his phone and quickly texted Lily, who had just woken up. "I'll text you during my break. Love you." The bus rumbled to a stop, and Ethan stepped off, staring at the imposing structure of the arena. He could see the massive screens outside, advertising the next home game. He adjusted his backpack strap and took a deep breath. This was it. Inside, the air was cooler, the smell of fresh popcorn and hot dogs already wafting through the hallways. He followed a security guard's directions to the employee entrance, where a stern-looking man with glasses and a clipboard waited. "Mr. Graham," his new supervisor. "Carter, right?" Mr. Graham asked without looking up. "You're early." That's good. First day jitters? No, sir. Just ready to get started. Ethan replied quickly. Too quickly. Mr. Graham raised an eyebrow. Well, let's see if that enthusiasm holds. Follow me, he said, turning on his heel and striding through the maze of hallways. Ethan hurried to keep up, trying to memorize every turn. The kitchen area was a flurry of activity. Workers stacking trays, unloading boxes of snacks, and refilling soda dispensers. The smell of melting butter on popcorn made Ethan's stomach rumble. Rule number 1. Always wash your hands before handling food or drinks, Mr. Graham said, his voice clipped. Rule number 2. Keep your station clean and organized at all times. And the most important rule, he paused to give Ethan a sharp look, no special treatment for anyone. No autographs, no photos, and absolutely no exceptions. Break that rule, and you're out. Understood? Yes, sir. Good. Sophie will show you the ropes. Mr. Graham gestured to a woman about 10 years older than Ethan, who smiled warmly. Her name tag said, Sophie. Don't let him scare you too much, she said, giving Mr. Graham a mock glare. He didn't react, simply jotting something down on his clipboard before walking off. He's all bark and no bite, Sophie added in a lower voice. Ethan wasn't so sure, but he nodded politely. Sophie quickly showed him how to work the register, mix the special sports drinks, and restock ice. She pointed out little tricks, like how to balance the cups just right so they wouldn't topple over and how to listen for the exact sound that meant the popcorn was perfectly popped. You're catching on fast, she said as Ethan placed a perfectly stacked row of nacho trays into the warmer. You'll be ready for game night in no time. By lunch break, Ethan felt more confident. He sat in the small employee break room, eating the sandwich his mom had packed. Pulling out his phone, he sent Lily another quick text. She responded immediately. Have you seen LeBron yet? Ethan chuckled and replied, not yet, but I'll keep an eye out. As the afternoon went on, Ethan continued learning the ropes. Customers trickled in for arena tours, and Ethan served them with a bright smile. He thought about what his mom had said, about showing up and doing his best. Every thank you and have a nice day brought him closer to his first paycheck. He had already decided, half would go to his mom for bills, and the other half would be saved for Lily's medicine. By closing time, Mr. Graham made his rounds, inspecting each station. When he reached Ethan's, he gave a small, approving nod. Not bad, Carter. You follow instructions well. That's good. Too many young people these days think rules don't matter. Thank you, sir, Ethan said, trying not to smile too much. Inside, he felt a small swell of pride. When Ethan got home, Lily greeted him excitedly. Did you see LeBron James? What about Anthony Davis? She asked, bouncing on her heels. No players today, Ethan said, ruffling her hair, but just wait until game night. Later, after Lily went to bed, Ethan found his mom at the kitchen table. She was surrounded by a pile of bills, a calculator clicking in her hands. She looked up and smiled faintly. So, how was your first day? Ethan sat down and leaned back in his chair. It was great. Mr. Graham said I did a good job. And Sophie showed me all these cool tips. I can even see part of the court from my station. It's better than I imagined. That's wonderful, Ethan, his mom said. I'm so proud of you. He felt a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't just the job, or the chance to see his basketball heroes in person. It was the knowledge that he was helping. He was doing something that mattered, for Lily, for his mom, and maybe even for himself. As he got ready for bed, he looked at the uniform hanging neatly on the door. The moonlight caught the Lakers logo, making it glow. Ethan smiled to himself. This was just the beginning. Ethan woke up that morning with a strange mix of nerves and excitement. It was finally here, his first game night working at Crypto.com Arena. The Lakers were playing the Boston Celtics, and the whole city buzzed with anticipation. He knew this wasn't just any game. It was a showdown that could decide the team's playoff spot. The stakes felt as high for him as they did for the players. As he rode the bus downtown, Ethan imagined the electric atmosphere he was about to step into. He'd watched countless Lakers games on TV with his family, but now he'd be part of the action, even if only from behind the concession counter. The bus passed by giant billboards featuring Lakers stars, LeBron James and Anthony Davis towering over the streets of Los Angeles. Ethan's heart pounded. Today wasn't just about earning a paycheck, it was about being part of something bigger. Something he'd dreamed of for years. At the arena, Ethan clocked in early. As always, the main concourse was already bustling. Vendors were stocking trays of nachos, filling soda machines, and rolling carts loaded with merchandise to the stands. Sophie caught sight of him and waved him over. "Nervous?" she asked, handing him an apron. Her smile was reassuring. "A little," Ethan admitted, tying the strings around his waist. "But mostly excited." "That's the spirit," Sophie winked. "Just remember what I taught you. The first rush is always the hardest. But once you find your rhythm, you'll define. And don't let Graham get under your skin. He's all bark." Ethan nodded, grateful for her encouragement. He double-checked his station, ensuring everything was stocked and clean. Mr. Graham passed by, clipboard in hand, giving curt nods as he inspected each stand. When he reached Ethan, he paused. "Carter," Graham said, his tone sharp as usual. "What's the rule about celebrities?" Ethan straightened up. "No special treatment, sir. Everyone's just a customer." "Good. Keep it that way." Graham made a note on his clipboard and moved on, leaving Ethan to exhale the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The first wave of fans poured in about an hour before tip-off. Ethan's hands moved quickly, scooping ice, pouring drinks, and passing out pretzels and popcorn. The line grew steadily, but he kept up, even managing to flash a quick smile at a young boy who was wearing a jersey 2 sizes too big. The kid grinned back, clutching his soda like it was a trophy. Ethan's eyes wandered to the main floor whenever he had a spare second. The arena was filling up fast. Purple and gold jerseys were everywhere, blending into a sea of Lakers pride. The giant screen above the court displayed pregame highlights, and Ethan caught a glimpse of LeBron dunking in warm-ups. For a moment, he was just another fan, caught up in the thrill of it all. As the game began, the noise in the arena was deafening. Every three-pointer brought the crowd to their feet. Each fast break had them roaring. Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at the court. LeBron James moved like a force of nature, weaving through defenders, his every move calculated and precise. Anthony Davis dominated the paint, blocking shots and grabbing rebounds. It was the Lakers at their best, and Ethan felt lucky just to be in the building. Then came the third quarter. The Celtics had fought back from a deficit, and the game was tight. The crowd's energy had shifted, becoming more anxious, more intense. Ethan's line was shorter now as fans stayed glued to their seats. But his heart raced just as fast. He knew the final minutes would be a nail-biter. Suddenly, a timeout was called, and the big screen zoomed in on the Lakers bench. Ethan froze. The camera focused on LeBron, and Ethan's stomach dropped. Something was off. LeBron James's complexion looked pale under the bright lights, and his shoulders slumped slightly as he breathed heavily. Ethan recognized that look. It wasn't exhaustion from the game, it was something deeper. Something he had seen before in the hospital when visiting his mom. His eyes darted to the special drinks stored in the back fridge. These weren't just any drinks, they were kept separate, marked with distinctive caps and labels. They were for emergencies. Ethan had memorized the colors and what they meant, even though he wasn't supposed to handle them. His training with Sophie had been thorough, and he had studied the employee manual front to back. He knew what that particular blue bottle with the silver cap was for. But he hesitated. Mr. Graham's voice rang in his head. No special treatment. No exceptions. If he ran out there and handed that drink to LeBron, he'd be breaking the biggest rule. He'd lose his job. The knot in his chest tightened. Then he thought of Lily. He thought of how his mom always put others first. How she'd told him to do his best and be someone people could count on. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant taking a risk. He grabbed the blue drink, his hand trembling, and stepped away from the counter. The crowd seemed to blur around him as he moved. He passed the security checkpoint, his purple uniform granting him access where others would have been stopped. As he approached the Lakers bench, a guard blocked his path. "Kid, you can't be here," the guard said firmly. Ethan held up the drink, trying to explain. "It's for LeBron James. Something's wrong. He needs this." The guard frowned, clearly uncertain. Then, as if on cue, LeBron turned and caught sight of Ethan. Their eyes met briefly, and to Ethan's surprise, LeBron nodded. "Let him through," LeBron James called out. The guard stepped aside, and Ethan rushed forward, his heart pounding. He handed the bottle to LeBron, who took it with a grateful nod. The big screen above the court captured the moment, the crowd erupting in cheers. It looked like a heartwarming scene, a young worker helping their basketball hero. Ethan barely had time to process it. He turned to head back to his station. And there he was, Mr. Graham, arms crossed, face dark as a storm cloud. Ethan knew what was coming. The rest of the game passed in a blur. The Lakers won in the final seconds, the arena exploding in celebration. But for Ethan, it was bittersweet. As the final buzzer sounded, Graham told him to report to the office the next morning. Sophie gave him a sad smile, her eyes saying what she didn't need to, "I'm sorry." Ethan packed up his things in silence and headed home. On the bus ride back, the cheers from the game still echoed in his ears. But all he could think about was the meeting with Graham. He had done the right thing. He had helped someone in need. But at what cost? At home, Lily was waiting for him. She didn't need to ask, his face said it all. "You did the right thing," she whispered as she hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you." Ethan clung to those words as he lay in bed that night. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over again. Something big was coming. He could feel it. He just didn't know what. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Graham's expression, the crossed arms, the look of quiet disappointment that spoke louder than any reprimand. And every time he thought of that look, he felt the same sting of regret. Not for what he had done. He still believed he had made the right choice, but for the reality of what was to come. By the time his alarm buzzed the next morning, Ethan was already dressed. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp of a bird outside. His mom, who worked the night shift again, was still asleep. Lily's faint snores drifted from the room down the hall. Ethan didn't have the heart to wake either of them, even just to say goodbye. He grabbed his bag, slipped out the door, and began the walk to the bus stop. The ride to the arena felt different this time. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows over his lap. The usual excitement, the nervous buzz that came with starting something new, was gone. Instead, his stomach churned with uncertainty. He watched as the city passed by. Familiar streets and intersections he'd walked so many times before. But today they all seemed slightly off. Like the world had shifted somehow. And he wasn't quite sure where he fit anymore. The arena looked just as imposing as it had the day before, its massive steel and glass facade catching the sunlight. But Ethan felt none of the awe that had filled him when he first walked through those doors. Instead, he felt small, as if the weight of the building was pressing down on him. Inside, the usual buzz of activity was subdued. Most of the vendors were setting up for the day, their conversations hushed. Sophie was nowhere to be seen. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the wide hallways as he made his way to the office. Graham was waiting when Ethan arrived. He stood behind his desk, the same clipboard in hand, though he wasn't jotting anything down. His expression was unreadable, but his posture, straight-backed, arms crossed, made Ethan's heart sink. "Have a seat, Carter," Graham said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Ethan sat, gripping the edge of the chair. Graham didn't speak right away. He looked down at the clipboard, then out the window, as if he were carefully choosing his words. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured. "You're a good kid," he began, setting the clipboard on the desk. "You're polite, you follow directions, and you've got a strong work ethic. I see that. I've seen it from day one." Ethan's chest tightened. He knew there was a "but" coming. "But," Graham continued, "you broke the most important rule we have here. No special treatment, no exceptions." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. "It's not just a guideline, Carter. It's a policy we enforce for a reason. Once we start making exceptions, the whole system falls apart. And as much as I admire your intentions, I can't ignore what happened." Ethan wanted to speak, to explain that he hadn't done it for personal gain, that he had acted on instinct because something had been wrong. But Graham raised a hand, stopping him. "I'm not here to debate what you did. I'm here to talk about what happens next." Ethan swallowed hard. "I have to let you go," Graham said, his voice softening slightly. "It's not an easy decision, but it's the right one for this organization. I hope you understand." Ethan nodded slowly, though he didn't truly understand. "I want you to know," Graham added, "this doesn't mean you're not good at what you do. It doesn't mean you're a bad employee